Dust rolled across the main street of Dry Creek like a low brown tide. Evening sun bled through the clouds, painting the boards of the saloon a deep rust red. Clara May stepped out first, bare feet dragging, cheek already swelling purple. Behind her came Jed Bracken, whiskey bottle in one hand, a gambler's sneer curling his lip. "You think you can steal from me?" he barked, voice raw from drink. Clara didn't answer. Her breath hitched against the dry wind. A single boot scuffed the wooden step as she tried to keep moving. Jed's shadow fell long across her back. "Look at me when I talk to you." She turned, slow as a hinge in need of oil. Lanterns flickered inside the saloon. A few card players leaned to the doorway, silent as tombstones. "I took nothing," she said, voice quiet but steady. Jed laughed, a sound like gravel ground under iron. "Liar." The bottle slammed against the rail, glass splintering. He grabbed her arm, fingers digging until her skin burned. "You think you're better than me? You ain't worth the dirt on my boots." Clara jerked free, stumbling into the dust. The crowd watched but didn't move. Boots shifted, spurs jingled, yet no one stepped forward. The sky deepened to copper. Wind kicked grit across the street, stinging her eyes. She wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand and met his glare. "You're done hurting me," she said. Jed's face twisted. He raised his hand, then paused, sensing something in her stare, steel where there'd once been fear. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. A door creaked open at the far end of the street. A lone rancher watched from the shadow of a hitching post, hat low, eyes unreadable. His presence alone felt like a line drawn in the dust. Jed spat near Clara's feet, the spit dark against the pale sand. "This ain't over," he muttered, voice sharp as a knife edge. He turned back into the saloon, the door swinging shut with a hollow clap. Clara stood alone under the burning sky, wind whipping her hair like a black flag of warning. The night smelled of smoke and promises. Somewhere beyond the horizon, destiny waited with a lantern's glow. Moonlight spilled across the wasteland like a sheet of cold silver. Clara May's wrists burned where the coarse rope cut deep, every jolt of the wagon sending fresh pain through her arms. Jed Bracken drove the mules without a word, whiskey fumes trailing behind him, eyes flat and merciless. The night wind hissed over the barren flats, carrying the scent of sage and something metallic, blood from her split lip. A coyote called far off, lonely and sharp. When the wagon finally lurched to a stop, Jed yanked her down into the dust. She hit hard, knees scraping stone. The moon caught the sneer on his face, making it look carved from iron. "You think you can shame me in front of a whole town?" he growled. Clara forced her voice steady. "You can beat me, but you'll never own me." His fist struck before the words fully left her mouth, a dull crack that sent stars spinning behind her eyes. She tasted iron, felt the warm slide of blood. Jed dragged her by the rope to a dead cottonwood, its limbs black against the sky. He looped the rope around the trunk, tying it tight enough to steal her breath. "Coyotes'll find you by dawn," he said, voice low and mean. "Let the desert teach you respect." He spat in the dust and turned back to the wagon. Hoofbeats faded until only the hush of wind remained. Clara sagged against the tree, chest heaving. The desert stretched endless, an ocean of pale sand and shadow. Scorpions rustled in the brush. Something slithered nearby. For a moment, despair clawed at her throat. Then she raised her head, eyes fixed on the stars. Their cold fire shimmered like a promise. "I will not break," she whispered, the words barely sound. She worked her wrists against the rope until skin tore and blood slicked the fibers. Each movement was agony, each breath a fight, yet a quiet strength burned inside her, small but unyielding. Far to the east, a faint glow edged the horizon, dawn crawling slow as hope. Clara closed her eyes, leaning into the cottonwood's rough bark. Somewhere out there, someone must hear the desert's silent cry, and she would hold on until they did. Lantern light flickered through the sage as dawn bled thin and gray. Elias Crow guided his chestnut mare along the creek bed, the chill of early morning biting through his coat. He was a man who rose with the sun and trusted the silence of the desert, but today the quiet carried a different weight, like the land itself was holding its breath. A scrap of fabric snagged on a mesquite branch caught his eye. He reined in, boots hitting the earth with a thud. Tracks led toward a crooked cottonwood, half dead and reaching skyward like a warning. There, slumped against the trunk, was a young woman, bound and battered, skin pale against the dark bark. Her lips were cracked, eyes half closed. "Miss?" His voice was low, steady. No answer, just the rattle of her breath. He dropped to one knee, lantern swinging. The rope was pulled cruel tight, soaked with blood. He cut it with a swift slice of his knife. Her wrists trembled as freedom met them. She stirred, whisper faint. "Don't let him." "Hush now," Elias said, slipping off his duster to wrap around her shoulders. "No one's gonna hurt you again." She sagged against him, light as a bundle of reeds. He lifted her easily, the scent of dust and fear heavy in the air. The ride back to his ranch was slow, deliberate. Hooves clopped through the dawn's first gold, the horizon glowing like a forge. Clara's head rested against his chest, breath shallow but alive. At the ranch, a weathered cabin waited, smoke curling from the chimney. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. The warm scent of coffee and cedar wrapped them both. Inside, shadows danced across rough-hewn walls. Elias laid her gently on a wool quilt near the hearth. He poured water into a basin, dampened a cloth, and cleaned the dust from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, catching the firelight. Why help me?" He met her gaze, calm and certain. "Because a man's worth isn't measured by blood ties or coin. It's in what he stands for." Outside, the wind softened as if the desert itself exhaled. For the first time in days, Clara felt the warmth of a safe place, a faint but steady flame against the long night she had survived. Dusk bled over the horizon like spilled copper, dust curling around the porch of Elias Crow's ranch. Clara May sat near the doorway, knees drawn tight, eyes scanning the long stretch of dirt road. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the distant saloon. A sudden hoofbeat echoed, low and deliberate. Jed Bracken appeared over the ridge, his silhouette jagged against the sinking sun, a bottle swinging in one hand, rage in the other. His eyes locked on Clara, dark and unyielding. "She's mine. Always will be," he growled, voice cracking with anger and liquor. Elias stepped forward, boots thudding against the wooden planks. His hand rested lightly on the rifle slung across his shoulder. "Not tonight. Not ever again," he said, calm but firm, voice carrying across the dusty yard. Jed spat in the dirt, anger flashing. "You think you can keep her from me?" Clara felt her chest tighten, fear and defiance battling. She gripped the edge of the porch, knuckles white. "Go back," she whispered, voice sharp. "Go back while you still can." The wind kicked up, lifting dust into swirling patterns around the men, shadows stretching long in the dying light. Horses stamped hooves restlessly, nostrils flaring. Every sound, the creak of boards, the slap of leather, hung in the air like a warning. Jed advanced a step, jaw tight, eyes flicking to Elias's rifle. He weighed the risk, felt the firmness of the man's stance. His mouth opened, then snapped shut. With a curse muttered under his breath, he turned. "You ain't seen the last of me," he spat, voice fading as he rode back toward the ridge. Dust swallowed his hooves. The bottle dangled from his hand like a promise of future storms. Clara exhaled slowly, chest still hammering. Elias rested a steady hand on her shoulder, eyes scanning the darkening horizon. "He won't win," he murmured, more to himself than to her. The porch lantern flickered, painting their faces with warm light. For the first time in days, Clara felt the tense knot of dread loosen. The desert held its breath, but for a moment safety had a shape, a strong arm, a steady gaze, a quiet vow that evil would not pass tonight. The first gray light of morning stretched across Dry Creek, brushing the rooftops with pale fire. Sheriff Abel Royce rode into town, spurs jingling softly, hat pulled low against the rising sun. His boots struck the earth with a rhythm older than law itself, steady, uncompromising, a promise that justice had teeth. He dismounted at the edge of the street, scanning the faces of townsfolk gathered near the saloon. Whispers curled like smoke. Jed Bracken had been seen again, trouble trailing him like a shadow. The sheriff's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, caught Clara May standing just inside the porch rail of Elias Crow's ranch. She flinched when their gazes met, but there was resolve in her stance. Elias stepped forward, rough hands resting on the railing. "Sheriff Royce," he said, voice low, "I need your help. That man, he won't stop. He's been tormenting her for years." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I've heard. Territory's tired of his brand of poison. He's left a long trail." Clara swallowed, voice catching. He'll come back. He always comes back." Royce's eyes softened for a fraction, then hardened. "Not if we make sure the law's on your side. We gather witnesses, we pin him with his crimes. Ain't no place for men like him in this land." The townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring about fear and loyalty, about the power Jed still wielded. Some hesitated, but others nodded, courage flickering to life like lanterns in the fog. Elias leaned closer, whispering to Clara, "You've survived this long. Now it's time the law stands with you, not against you." The sheriff mounted his horse, dust rising with each hoofbeat. "We start today," he declared, voice carrying over the open plain. "We find the witnesses, we bring him to justice, and we make sure he never harms another soul." Clara watched him ride off, a spark of hope warming her chest. The desert felt less empty now, the wind gentler. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Jed's shadow still lurked, but the horizon was no longer a place of despair. It was a place of reckoning, and this time, Clara would not be alone. The morning sun climbed higher, igniting the rooftops in gold. For the first time, Clara believed that the dark trail of her past might finally meet the light of justice. Night fell like a velvet cloak over the Crow Ranch, the stars pricking the sky cold and distant. Lanterns swung in the wind, throwing quivering shadows across the porch and the dusty yard. Clara May sat near the hearth, stitching a torn quilt, ears straining for the first hint of danger. From the ridge, hoofbeats thundered. 3 of Jed Bracken's men, torches blazing, firelight licking the desert sage. Jed himself led the assault, eyes wild, bottle dangling from one hand, revolver in the other. Smoke spiraled with the lantern light, turning the ranch into a painting of chaos and fear. Elias Crow stood on the porch, rifle in hand, shoulders squared. "Stay inside," he called, but Clara shook her head, heart hammering. "No, I'm done running." Horses reared, hooves scraping hard-packed earth. Flames caught the barn's siding, sending sparks flying into the night. Bullets cracked the silence. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and burnt wood. Clara grabbed the spare rifle from the wall, hands trembling. "Elias," she whispered. "Steady," he said, jaw tight. "Remember what you've survived. Remember who you are." The attackers advanced, but the pair held their ground, each shot ringing with desperate clarity. Sparks danced like fallen stars as the fire spread, shadows bending and twisting around them. Clara's eyes met Elias's. Silent understanding passed between them. This was no longer just survival. This was a stand for everything they'd lost. The night roared with chaos, wind and fire and defiance, and somewhere beyond the flames, Jed's fury collided with a resolve he could not understand. The battle for the ranch and for Clara's freedom had reached its tipping point. Just as the firelight threatened to consume the barn, distant hoofbeats echoed, stronger and faster. Sheriff Abel Royce and 2 deputies rode hard through the dark, lanterns swinging, boots pressing spurs into the night. Jed's gang faltered, eyes wide, realizing the law had arrived. The desert wind carried the clatter of rifles and the shouts of men, each one a hammer striking fear into the outlaws' hearts. Elias's rifle barked, steady and sharp. Clara crouched behind the porch, gripping her weapon, heart hammering. "They're here," she whispered. Hope tangled with adrenaline, a rope pulling her from despair. The deputies spread out, cornering Jed's men. Flashing gunfire illuminated the night, shadows jagged and cruel, horses whinnied, dust and smoke choking the air. One by one, the gang fell back, retreating under the law's unyielding pressure. Jed himself froze, pinned beneath the sheriff's revolver. Blood and sweat streaked his face. I ain't guilty of nothing," he whispered, voice trembling as pale as the moonlight. Elias stepped forward, rope in hand, eyes cold but steady. "Not tonight," he said. "Not ever again." The rope looped tight around Jed's wrists, the weight of justice settling on the outlaw's shoulders like Stahl knee. Clara watched, chest heaving, tears mixing with soot and sweat. The desert held its breath, then exhaled. The terror that had haunted her for years began to crumble, replaced by a fragile, flickering relief. Sheriff Royce nodded to Elias. "It's done. They'll answer for what they've done." For the first time, Clara felt the world shift beneath her boots. Not the earth of dust and fear, but the weight of a promise fulfilled. Safety at last had a shape, a name, and a man who would fight to keep it. The night seemed quieter now, as if the desert itself had witnessed the turning of fate, and finally the long shadow of Jed Bracken had been caught in the light.